If you move back a number of years and we talked about artificial intelligence, we would probably talk in terms of neural networks and whatnot. But today, as artificial intelligence quickly marches into mainstream society, the conversation about AI also happens on a higher abstraction level. Which brings us to our first speaker of the day. She's got nearly 3 decades in the tech industry, and she's been recognized by tech giants such as Amazon and Oracle for her contributions in the tech community. She's passionate about technology, but also about building the community, about building the next generation of leaders. She's won numerous awards, such as the Mentor of the Year in the Women Tech Network. And she has had her portrait on display on the Nasdaq 1,000 square meter LED billboard on Times Square, New York. Please welcome to the stage, Kesha Williams. Good luck.
Good morning, everyone. Let's get rid of this blue screen of death. That is why I use a Mac. How's everyone this morning? Okay, let's give it a few seconds to warm up, and we will talk about ethics in AI. Okay. The wave of transformation that we are seeing happening with Gen AI is unlike anything that we have ever seen before in the tech industry. And I always tell my friends, it is such an exciting time to be in tech, to see the change. And looking ahead, when I think about AI, I still see this continued integration in our daily lives, in our homes, in our offices, every sector, every industry. There's just no escaping it. And ethics in AI and combating bias play a huge role in ensuring that this technology does not negatively impact our lives. Today, I am going to introduce this concept of balancing innovation with integrity in this amazing age of AI. I'm Kesha Williams. I've been in tech for almost 29 years. I have the gray hair to prove it. I currently work in consulting, leading a team of consultants focusing on AWS, AI, and ML solutions. To address the topic of ethics in AI, we are going to look at the journey of a fictitious company called Clear News AI. It's an AI startup that has a mission to revolutionize news analysis using Gen AI. Gen AI is unlike traditional machine learning because we can use it to create something that did not exist before: music, images, videos, and content. So imagine this tool. It's an LLM, large language model powered tool. Just think of a tool just powered by ChatGPT. Who's heard of ChatGPT? Everyone. Who's played around with ChatGPT? Hopefully everyone. So a ChatGPT powered tool that's going to analyze and summarize news articles from various sources from around the globe based on your personal preference. Think how powerful a tool like this could be. Pretty powerful. Think how it could share information on a global scale. But also think how it could easily sway public opinion. As Clear News AI started conceptualizing this tool, the potential seemed limitless, like what we talked about. Personalized news, uncovering hidden patterns and trends and news across the globe, around the world, and democratizing information. The team soon realized, though, that there are a lot of ethical complexities and potential societal impacts. Oftentimes in my line of work, I see ethics as an afterthought. after the system is already in production, after it's already caused harm, after there's been negative press. So it's good that they are thinking about ethics up front. So how will this tool work? Simply, it will provide balanced and hopefully unbiased news, summaries. It will do sentiment analysis, that's understanding the tone and the meaning, and it will help users stay informed. They will face many challenges on their journey in developing this tool. So let's join them. We are already at a crucial step with Clear News AI. The team is not just creating technology, they are shaping the future of how we as a society consume information. And AI ethics at its core is about ensuring that the future respects our values and rights and individuals as a society. The team met to discuss the tool. They had several brainstorming sessions to identify the pros and the cons of their tool. So think to yourselves, what challenges will they face on their journey? What are all the things that could go wrong? What are all the things that could go right? Stop and think to yourself. So when we look at what could go right, unparalleled access to information, personalized and nuanced news, and just a deep analysis and accessibility of global news, and then just the ability to educate people, empower people, and connect people. And then the cons, which a lot of you mentioned, it's the lack of ethical consideration, the ability to amplify misinformation, reinforce societal biases, and manipulate public opinion, which I don't know about over here, but the news in the United States already does that. And so you all came up with a lot of the cons. So when Clear News AI thought about this, they decided to make this conscious effort to ensure that the tool not only delivers insightful news, but it upholds integrity, respects privacy, and promotes the well-being of society. Now, I started my AI journey back in 2017. And back then, coming from a software engineering background, when I started learning it, I realized that my role as a software engineer was about to change. Because now, as I'm developing systems, I really need to think about how what I'm doing will impact society. So there's an ethical and moral responsibility that I now have. And I realized it was no longer okay for me to just say, okay, I'm going to build this system just because my boss said so. Now, as an engineer in the age of AI, we have to look at how what we're developing, how it will impact society. And if there are ethical issues, bias issues, it's up to us to raise our hands and say, wait a minute, something is not right. So at Clear News AI, the team was initially thrilled with their tool's ability to summarize news articles and headlines quickly. But they soon realized a problem during testing. Surprise, surprise. Let's look at this example. So this is the headline that the tool needs to summarize. Tech giant unveils groundbreaking innovation to boost internet accessibility worldwide. Seems like a pretty simple headline. So this is the summary that the tool came up with. Tech behemoth pushes aggressive global dominance through so-called internet accessibility initiative. By show of hands, does anyone see any problems with summary 1? Everybody? Summary 1, it does not maintain the integrity of the original news, and it doesn't focus on the positive impacts. And like I mentioned, the news in the United States, I don't watch. Because if I watched the news back home, I would literally be afraid to go outside. So I never know what's going on in the world. But maybe a tool like this would help me. So how about summary 2? Tech company introduces innovative solution to enhance global internet access. That one sounds much better. This headline, local charity organization exceeds fundraising goals to support homeless shelters. Summary 1, the tool came up with local charity flaunts funding excess while homelessness crisis persists. Not a great summary. How about charity surpasses targets, providing significant support to homeless communities? Starting to see the difference? There's one more example. Renowned scientist receives prestigious award for climate change research. The Clear News AI tool says, elite scientist garners exclusive accolade for controversial climate agenda. How about this summary? Celebrated researcher honored for groundbreaking contributions to climate science. I think you get the picture. And so this is an example of how bias shows up when using a large language model. And so Clear News AI realized that they had several challenges in balancing the news representation. And so they realized that certain topics and perspectives were misrepresented and even exaggerated. And a lot of these topics are very sensitive and should be handled with care. For example, certain political events were consistently portrayed negatively, while others overly positive. And this really made them stop and think about the ethical dilemmas and ask several important questions. So the data scientists on the team posed this question: what about the biases in our data sources? And the team also had an ethicist, which is a fairly new role as a result of generative AI. How can we ensure the neutrality of our tool amidst polarized content? And the engineer on the team posed this question: what mechanisms can we implement to detect and correct bias? That's a question I would ask. And then a machine learning engineer, how do we ensure the tool remains neutral? And then the project manager, how can we help users trust the system? All important questions. They realized that they were gatekeepers and stewards of a technology with a very far-reaching impact. And these are questions you should ask before you even start to develop a solution. And this was also their first real confrontation with bias in large language models. So bias shows up as systematic errors that could lead to skewed perception of the news. And we saw those 3 examples. So they recognized that not only what they were seeing was a technical flaw, it was also an ethical one that they needed to address. When you start to influence public opinion and you start to change the course of someone's life through technology, ethics has to be at the forefront. They understood the need to address it head-on to maintain the integrity and reliability of their news tool. So what did they do? They started to dissect the layers of their large language model, really trying to determine the root cause. So at first, there's this input layer. That's the layer that receives the raw news headline, and the model will use that to generate a summary. From the input layer, there's this pre-processing layer that takes that raw headline, it cleans it, and it processes it. So think removing unnecessary punctuation and formatting, and potentially encoding it into a numeric format. We all know that machines understand numbers, and so that's the encoding process. From the pre-processing layer, there is the model architecture layer. And this is the complex neural network architecture that processes the headline. It's trying to understand the context of it, nuances, and any key points. The next layer is this training processing layer, and this is where it just learns how to condense articles and headlines into summaries effectively. And lastly, the output and the interpretation layer. This is where it generates a concise summary for the news article. Now, bias can show up in all of these layers, and there are tools, and I'll share those with you, that can help you identify bias. So as Claire News AI started to dissect the layers, they identified 3 types of bias: data bias, algorithmic bias, and interpretation bias. Let's talk about data bias. This happened at the input layer, that very first box in that architecture diagram. So their training data set included headlines from sources, unfortunately, that were biased toward certain viewpoints. And we saw the model replicate that bias in the examples that we looked at. They realized they needed to broaden their data set, make their data set more balanced, and pull in news from international sources, independent sources, and not just sources with certain political leanings. So first, they tried to balance out their data to get rid of the data bias. That's the first type of bias they saw. In that model architecture layer, they saw algorithmic bias. Now, this is really based on how the model is designed and trained, and it favors certain patterns, and sometimes it overlooks other patterns, but it consistently misinterpreted the news. And so when they dug a little deeper, they realized that the LLM favored articles that had historically received high engagement. That's the measure that the model used to determine good news, good article, a good example to follow. So how did they fix that? The team worked on redefining the parameters to prioritize content based on diversity and neutrality over engagement. The next type of bias, interpretation bias. And we see this really in 2 places. It's one, it's how the summary is presented to the user, the end user, but then how the end user takes that summary and interprets it. So the team also had personal biases in how they interpret what consulted as neutral news. So it's similar to challenges faced in the legal system, where different judges interpret laws differently based on their personal biases. So to address this, they initiated regular workshops with journalists, ethicists, and just a diverse group of stakeholders to help change their understanding of fairness. Additionally, to address the biases identified, the Clear News AI team convened to explore tools that could help identify bias in each layer. And a lead developer introduced several important tools. So let's talk about those tools, because it really helped them revolutionize their approach. So as I call off these tools, I'd love to see a show of hands if you've heard of these tools. So who has heard of AI Fairness 360 as a tool to help identify bias? Nobody? Uh-oh. What about FairLearn? Okay, yes. I see a couple of hands for FairLearn. Who's heard about this What If tool? Oh, you guys are going to learn a lot today. What about Amazon SageMaker Clarify? Yes. And this is a really new one, Amazon Ref Checker. Who's heard of that? Okay, so let's talk about each tool and how it can be applied in each layer. So AI Fairness 360, it is an open source library by IBM. It offers metrics and algorithms really designed to help you identify and understand and mitigate bias in your machine learning models. Now, the Clear News AI team, they were intrigued by this tool's ability to provide a detailed breakdown of bias in their data and in their model, and also providing actionable insights. They envision using this tool to analyze their training data sets, looking for bias, and just identifying underrepresented groups or skewed perspectives that might lead to a bias summary. So check that tool out if you're an IBM fan. FairLearn is a toolkit from Microsoft, and it provides interactive visualizations and metric comparisons. And so the team figured they could use this tool to test their LLMs against the various fairness metrics. And they can use it in the development and in the testing phases. I really like the name of this tool, the What If tool by Google. It's a very powerful resource. It gives you the ability to visualize your model behavior and just run hypothetical scenarios and just really creatively explore how your large language model will handle certain news headlines. And it's a great way to test for bias in different contexts. And then I think this is my favorite, Amazon SageMaker Clarify. It's a tool that I've had the opportunity to play around with and really integrate it into various parts of the machine learning lifecycle. So it can do pre-training bias detection, looking at your data. It can also test the output of your model, identifying post-training bias, and it can also help you explain features. So explainable AI is really important to really understand and explain why the model made a certain decision. So a huge fan of SageMaker Clarify. And then Ref Checker is a fairly new tool. I have not had the opportunity to play around with it, but it promises to identify hallucinations in large language models. Who's heard of hallucinations? Yes, yes. I simply say it, it's when the large language model tells a lie. That's very believable. So the team decided to run a pilot test using several tools, applying the tools to the most recent version of their large language model, and the results were eye-opening. Bias was all over the place, even in places they hadn't previously considered before. So it just shows the power of using tools to help identify and mitigate bias. So what did they decide to do? Now that they've realized the different types of bias in their systems, they decided to establish clear guidelines for responsible AI. And it really helps them navigate this minefield of ethical AI. So first, they looked at global AI regulations. Who's heard of the EU's AI Act? Everybody. Who's heard of the US's AI executive order? Some people. So with the EU's AI Act, it categorizes specific AI systems as high risk, and then it really mandates strict compliance rules, including risk mitigation, quality data sets, enhanced documentation, and human oversight. All great things to consider when you're dealing with AI systems. It also has transparency and ethical standards. What I really like, there's enforcement and impact and penalties. So companies will pay hefty fines if they don't follow the guidelines in the Act. On the other hand, for the United States, our AI executive order is more of a framework. It has recommendations. It provokes thought-provoking conversations, but it's not as stringent as the AI Act. So there are no penalties, fines, or any of that. But it just really seeks to influence how technology companies work with AI and interact with AI systems. So after looking at the EU's AI Act and the US's executive order, the Clear News AI team came out with 6 guiding principles. The first is around transparency. So disclosing data sources, algorithms, and methodologies, and allowing users to understand how systems were developed. Transparency is very important. Next is accountability. Right now, there are a lot of questions around who is accountable. Is it the person? Is it the company that developed the system? Is it the software engineer? Is it the user? Having clear protocols and being able to track who made the decisions and who's responsible is very important. And then, of course, fairness. So rigorous bias testing and continuous monitoring of the output. That's very important whenever you're working with an AI system. You train the model, you put it in production, that is not the end. There should be an ongoing monitoring and retraining to make sure bias is not introduced. And then, of course, privacy, enabling, making sure that the user data is protected, security, preventing unauthorized access to the systems, and of course, inclusivity, ensuring the tool serves the diverse global user base. So of these 6 key principles, they decided to focus on transparency first. In a world that's skeptical about AI, transparency is the key to building trust, the key to building your user base. And what I've seen is just an overall lack of transparency, a lack of explainability, and that can lead to public distrust and even legal challenges. So I like to draw a parallel to this real-world scenario. You're a patient in the hospital, you have a treatment plan, you want to know details about that plan. You essentially demand to know the rationale behind certain treatments. I foresee as users start to realize that they are the actual subjects of AI, they are going to start to demand the same level of transparency. They will seek to understand the workings behind these systems and why certain decisions were made. We see that AI is used in healthcare, it's used in home loans, it's used in lending, it's used in hiring. And so people, as they realize this, they are going to want to know more. And so Clear News AI is committed to demystifying their LLMs process. So there are several tactics that they can employ to help with explainability. One, they can use explainability techniques. They can use visualizations. They can have simplified model summaries and a user feedback loop. So let's talk about these 4. Underneath explainability techniques, there are two common techniques, LLM and SHAP. They help explain the predictions of machine learning models, and they're really straightforward to use. So LLM focuses on local explanations for individual predictions. And SHAP provides more comprehensive explanations around which features actually influence the output. So let's talk about LLM. Imagine the team is unsure about why the tool summarized the news headline the way it did. So LLM helps simplify the decision-making process, and it's like asking the tool, tell me, why did you make that decision? And the tool will say, well, the tone of the headline caused me to summarize it in this manner. Or the number of likes for that news article caused me to summarize it in this manner. It just really helps with the explainability and understanding the decisions. On the other hand, SHAP displays various features as bars, a very easy to read graph, each with a different height that indicates the level of the impact on the model's decision. So for example, it actually quantifies how important likes were when making the recommendation or the summarization. And it can quantify how important the tone was. It just really shows the impact of each feature goes a long way in explainability. They also use visualizations to help users understand the advanced algorithmic decisions. I mentioned to you all back in 2017, I started my machine learning AI journey. Coming from a Java software engineering background, when I thought about transitioning to AI and machine learning, I just felt at first that it was just something so complex. I needed to be working toward my PhD, working in a research lab somewhere before I could really understand it and make sense of it. But then I realized it's really not as hard as people make it out to be. And through visualizations and tools and documentation on the AWS website, it really helped me start to grasp and understand the concepts and how AI could be applied in the real world. And I'm just really excited and happy to see where we are today with AI and Gen AI, because it's what I've been waiting for since 2017. Now, this is a really cool idea, and I especially like this for explaining machine learning models. So just imagine a nutrition label for an AI system where it talks about the accuracy. So all machine learning models have an accuracy score. 98%, you can tell I made this up because I've never seen 98% accuracy. But just imagine the accuracy score. There's a last updated date, so the last time this model was trained on fresh data, the training time, so how many iterations, how long did it take for the model to learn and find trends and patterns? And what about the data source? How diverse was the data source? 75%. Is that good? Is that bad? And what about the architecture used to train the model, the transformer architecture? User-friendly, transparent, digestible summaries for every AI model. I would love to see something like this come to life. And then, something that is very important, that is totally and wholly underutilized, is the user feedback loop. This is really the most important part that will help you understand how your system is performing in the real world, how users are interacting with it, and it will be a way to really tip you off on changes that you need to make. And so Clear News AI established user feedback loops. Users can ask questions, contribute, attend meetings, and it really helped to refine the ongoing process. So user feedback loops are really important. So when you think about stakeholders and users of your system, who come to mind, specifically when you're dealing with AI and Gen AI systems? Of course, users, but who else? Who else would we need to consider in a user feedback loop? What about policymakers? So in the US, there are government officials really trying to dissect and understand Gen AI, trying to put laws and rules in place around fairness, bias, ethics, how we store data about people, how we tell people that they are the subjects of AI systems. Policymakers are big, ethicists, journalists, reporters, and users. And so Clear News AI defined a persona for each user type and really figured out a way to engage those users with targeted surveys, one-on-one interviews, and community forums. They also realized that ethics goes beyond the code. The data and the code, they're just really small parts to the bigger picture of what needs to be considered. So Clear News AI initiated several actions. They engaged diverse stakeholders to help guide the development of their tool. They included ethicists and community representatives. They formed an ethics board. They conducted regular bias audits. And they continually educate the development team on ethical AI practices. And they realize that feedback loops go far beyond just getting opinions, that they take those opinions and they integrate it into their tool's development. They get the user feedback, they incorporate it in development, they improve the tool, and it's just this ongoing process. They actively foster a community, they encourage participation and co-creation. And they did it through the thoughtful development and deployment of their tool. They did everything they sought to do. They provided unparalleled access to information. They educate, empower, and connect the world, and they offer personalized news analysis. So there are a lot of lessons that we learned today from the Clear News AI journey. They think about bias and ethics up front. It's not an afterthought. They focus on key principles like transparency, accountability, fairness, privacy, security, and inclusivity. They use tools to help uncover and mitigate bias. There are a lot of tools out there that help. And they implement feedback loops with stakeholders, and they use that feedback to continually improve their product. So equipped with knowledge and inspired by innovation, you are ready to stand and navigate this ever-evolving landscape of AI, carrying forward the principles of integrity, transparency, and responsibility. But your journey doesn't end today. Feel free to continue your learning journey with a couple of courses I have on Pluralsight. Message me on LinkedIn and I will give you free access. Yes, I can do that. There's a course ensuring the ethical use of LLMs in data projects and prompt engineering for improved performance. That's Pluralsight. And then you can also check me out on LinkedIn Learning. Again, just message me and I'll send you a free link. If you're just getting started with machine learning and you're looking to transition your skill set, I recommend my Artificial Intelligence Foundations Machine Learning course. And then ChatGPT, the OpenAI API, it's very popular. I have several courses that explain the different components of the API and how you can integrate them in applications. And then a few blog posts on Pluralsight. I talk about a blueprint for responsible innovation with large language models. And then on the Florida Technology Council document, really aimed toward policymakers, just navigating the AI frontier, considerations for Florida's responsible innovation. Now, I'd like to open the floor to questions. What's on your mind? Yes.
You talked a lot about trying to minimize our biases. How do we objectively measure how big our bias is? How do we know the ground truth, and how do we measure our delta and minimize it?
Right. So what we do in the United States, because we realize people, if you have a bias, you may not even know. We call it unconscious bias. And so we take all of our employees developing AI systems through unconscious bias training to help them really understand and find their blind spots. And I always think back to, I'm not sure if you all heard about this story back in the United States, but a few years ago, the city of San Francisco, California, completely banned facial recognition technology because it was biased against people of color. And I thought to myself, you know, the development team did not catch that during testing, because the development team lacked diversity. But I thought to myself, I don't think they did it on purpose. You're not going to develop a system and say, hey, let's make sure this is biased against people of color. It's just a blind spot, you don't know. And so people need to be trained to uncover those biases.
I feel like you didn't answer my question, but I'll take it.
Well, say your question again. I'm going to give him the...
Right, so the heart of my question is, how do you know that the ground truth you're trying to approach is objectively true, so that when you reach it, you're like, all right, that is the closest we're going to get? I mean, I can know that there's a span to where it's, oh, we're definitely too far on this end or this end, but how do you actually know for yourself that this is closer to perfect than what we were yesterday?
And so is your question saying the output produced by the model, how do I know that's close to perfect, close to the ground truth?
Whatever metric you choose for bias. When you say, I want to minimize bias for this, or this, pick any favorite, whichever bias. I'm not an expert in this.
So we can, go back to the data bias that I talked about, and that's where your data set is imbalanced, and that can lead to bias. And so there are tools that can tell you how biased your data is based on how it's balanced. And so that way, you could use that metric to really objectively understand how biased is your data set. You correct that before you go through training, and then your output should be better. Does that answer your question? You don't look like it answers your question. We could try again. We have time. We have time, don't we? We have 10 minutes. That's a lot of time. No. Maybe I'm just not understanding your question. Hi.
Hi. I have a question, or maybe what's your opinion on the regulatory difference between the US and the EU, as you described it? What will be the impact 5-10 years from now? I understand that US and China is at the forefront. Do you think EU will have an advantage with this regulation, or will it be a, what do you call it, a blocker or break?
That's a great question. So when I compare EU's AI Act to what I'm seeing in the United States, the EU is far ahead. And I'm very impressed with the regulations, guidelines, and just the overall governance and enforceability of what the EU has provided. For the United States, like I mentioned, it's just more of a guideline, more of a suggestion. There really aren't any laws as of yet. And so the way I mentioned the article that targets Florida, each state, so we have laws for the country, but then each state can have their individual laws. And I just look, states in the entire country, we're so far behind. So I'm hoping that the EU's AI Act will become this sort of guiding beacon that influences what we do in the United States, because it's important to be able to enforce whatever rules and laws you have in place by really hitting the bottom line and making companies pay fines. And so, like I said, we don't have anything like that yet in the United States. I'm hoping that we learn from the EU's AI Act and implement that. I think at some point we're going to have to get there, because if you don't, unfortunately, if you don't penalize people and you don't govern, people are still going to do whatever they want to do. So, great question. Yes?
Yes, I'm curious. Many of the questions and concerns with AI-generated news are pretty much the same for non-AI generated news. So are there any tools or frameworks to rate the ethics of non-AI generated news?
Say that last piece again.
Or if there are any existing tools or frameworks to rate news in general, not just AI generated news?
So you're saying how to rate just content in general that's not generated by AI? That is a good question. How do we rate content that's not generated by AI? I think today in our society, we rate content based on the engagement, comments, the number of likes. I just think back to like social media. If something has 1 million likes versus something that has 5 likes, we're going to automatically assume the one that has 1 million likes is better. And that may not be the best way to rate content. But that's what comes to mind when I think about how we measure content today. Does anyone else have any ideas on how we measure content that's not generated by AI today?
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I work in communications, and the past year, hardly anything is not created by AI.
That is true.
So in a couple of years, I really doubt that a lot of content will be handmade.
That's
so to
true.
speak. So the whole profession is changing. So how do you rate something that is non-existing?
I don't know about that one. I don't know how to answer that.
But I had another question for you. Speaking about languages and translations, I'm assuming that the data sources are from all over the world, right?
Right.
So that means you have a lot of data sources in other languages.
Right.
How do you take lost into translation, into consideration, especially since you speak about tone, and tone can be so different. And we all know, misinterpretations of certain words and biases, how you use them in different parts of the world, etc. That's kind of what I couldn't see in the process, the translation aspect, and the fact that things can be lost in translation.
Right.
How do you reason when it comes to that?
Right. So to solve that, we definitely need to keep humans in the loop. Whenever we're using AI or Gen AI to make a recommendation, translate an article, say whether or not this person should get the car loan or the home loan, it's very important to have a human stay in the loop and sort of provide a second set of eyes, because we just cannot blindly trust what these AI systems output. So it's important to have a human in the loop still.
So where are the translators in your process? You have ethics on board in the team, but where are the translators?
The translators?
You said you need a couple of second opinions.
Right.
Eyes.
So if we go back to the fictitious Clear News AI, once there is the output, which in that story is the summary of the headline, we would need a second set of eyes to look at that summary. So remember that screen where I gave the example headline in summary 1, summary 2? We would need a human to verify or confirm that that summary is accurate for whatever language. But what I've learned, like with large language models, they have, and you all mentioned you've played around with ChatGPT, because of their pre-training, they have the ability to replace multiple traditional machine learning models. Like one LLM can do the language translation like you were talking about. It could do the summary like we talked about. And so there, again, we would just need a human in the loop. And at some point, we would continue to like retrain, give that feedback, and slowly, hopefully, this hasn't happened yet, slowly, hopefully really start to trust the output enough where there's not a lot of reliance on humans. But for now, it's important to have that human in the loop.
I would just like to say that it's not just the human, you would need a native speaker,
Yes.
which makes it, you know, time-consuming and quite expensive.
That is true.
Yeah.
Clear News AI better charge high prices so they can hire the people they need to hire.
China was mentioned in a previous question. They might be, we don't know, behind the closed doors they are developing quite quickly in AI. Mm-hmm. Should we be worried about that, and how should we deal with it?
So the first part of your question was related to, did I hear China?
Yeah, China was mentioned in the previous question.
Okay.
That they are quite ahead in AI, and we don't know how far. How should we deal with that? Considering the EU, for example, we are putting a lot of limitations on what's possible to do without getting fined, for example. Mm-hmm. How to handle when China doesn't have those limitations and can just go forth with their things.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because there's always the struggle where controls, security, ethics, all important things, but it can tend to slow down our ability to innovate. And so what I believe we all should do is just everyone should just upskill and start to learn more about AI, Gen AI, and how it can be applied, and then just take those learnings and try to innovate and try new things. But if China doesn't have those same limitations, and it's really a free-for-all, and they are going to be able to move more quickly than the rest of us. Good questions.
I think we should cancel the other sessions and just go.
No, don't do that.
Thank you. A bit more practical question, maybe. These tools that you mentioned, AI fairness and the rest, what limitations or consideration does that put on the model architecture, or how the model is made? Do you need to build the models inside their respective cloud providers' tools, or can they be used for a black box model?
So let me make sure I understand your question. Is your question around how do we integrate those tools into the development process?
Yeah, what limitations, if I want to use like Fairlearn, do I need to take any consideration on how I design and architect my model in order to be able to use these tools?
Yes, some tools you will have to integrate it into your development and into your testing and into that automated retraining process. So specifically like SageMaker, Clarify, there's a component where in your architecture you're going to monitor your model for bias and drift once it's in production. And so in that life cycle, you need to integrate that tool. And we can continue discussing it because we're at 0 time. Well, thank you all. It has been an amazing morning.